Could Batman take down Toru and the Locacaca organization? This is again another rather large, multifaceted question, just like before. Batman in multiple DC continuities has fought in rather large and dangerous organized crime gangs within Gotham and outside of Gotham, whether that be the League of Assassins, the Court of Owls, or a various amount of crime families in Gotham or outside of it. But never a group whose strongest members are all stand-powered rock humans operating under a even greater and stronger rock human. The Calamity and Fate manipulating stand user, Toru, and Wonder Review. While this question I am posing is similar to my last Batman video, the outcome and the feats in order to overcome this organization require something much more out of Batman than ever before. This matchup requires Batman to be at his absolute best in terms of his intellect and fighting prowess. While Part 8 JoJolion has a much smaller villain cast, do not underestimate any of them at all. On a personal level, I would actually say, for the most part, a lot of the minor villains in the organization can do some pretty heavy damage because of their stand abilities. And in addition, if Batman were to make it to the final grand battle with Toru, the reality of the situation is, regardless of what I have to say, Toru forces Batman into a one-on-one fight with no prep time. So Batman's greatest strength becomes his greatest weakness. Oh, and I forgot to mention, by the way, Wonder Review is the strongest stand in JoJo's, or at bare minimum, the strongest villain stand in the entire franchise. Mind you, that's saying a hell of a lot compared to some of the main villain demons in this franchise. So does Batman have what it takes to actually defeat any of them? Would he even make it to Toru in the first place? Could Batman even overcome Wonder Review and its ability to control Calamity? Could Batman even gain a stand like last time to stand a fighting chance? Could Batman even win? Let's figure that out. And oh, by the way, hello, my name is Metas.
あるかもしれない
Walk with me. So just like last time, this video will be half story and half power scaling because you guys liked it a lot last time, meaning that we'll be using two different versions of Batman here, a more general JoJo's Batman and then mainline comic Batman towards the end of the video. Both Batman will not be using outside DC help during any of these encounters because I want to show off what Batman is truly capable of under these kind of conditions. So when it comes to this version of JoJo's Batman, his scaling will be the exact same, just like last time, having a high intellect and fighting prowess that Batman is known for, the common stuff you find in his utility belt, and being a Batman with several years of experience, and at most I think it would be 10, with feats ranging from peak human to possibly superhuman, just like some of the popular variations of the character that you probably all know, that being like Arkham Batman or the animated series, with his greatest power being, of course, a billionaire. Now, I'll save some of the crazier power scaling for mainline comic Batman for later. For the most part, I want to keep the power scaling pretty tame here till the very end when I talk about him. And on top of that, to make this more fascinating than just an average death battle between a character versus another character, I'll add some story details here and there to keep you on your toes. Basically, win and loss conditions. Those being, if Batman beats the whole Locacaca organization, he wins. This is a pretty obvious one. 2, if anybody in the Locacaca organization actually beats him, that's where the story more than likely ends. With the third being Toru kills Batman during their final encounter or any time before that. I did want to add a fourth to where if Toru reveals the abilities of the Locacaca to the world that he wins, but he did do that and nothing really changed. So I'm not going to be adding that one as a win or loss condition. However, though, I would say that is a goal of Batman's to get the fruit away from the group in order to use it for good. So with all the setup out of the way, let's dive into the story. In this version of JoJo's SBR universe, Bruce Wayne experiences the same tragic fate as so many different versions of him across the multiverse, losing his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne. After years of vigorous training, he becomes the Batman. By this point, he's been operating as Batman for several years and has become aware of the Locacaca fruit within Gotham. The fruit possesses the ability to regenerate any lost body part, such as a leg, in exchange for eyesight, for example. This process can be repeated as long as the individual can acquire more of the fruit. Additionally, the sap of the Locacaca retains the same exchange properties as the fruit itself. However, Batman, under critical analysis, realizes the fruit has a significant flaw. There is a significant risk involved in some cases of the fruit being fatal, resulting in the loss of brain functions in exchange for a missing limb. Recognizing the potential power of the Locacaca, Batman theorizes a new grafted fruit or a potential Locacaca-based drug could be possibly developed. However, if mishandled, these creations could lead to dangerous consequences, especially in the wrong hands. Batman now finds himself tracking down the Locacaca organization regulation in Japan in order to stop its trade of a very dangerous and potentially world-changing fruit. So for anybody wondering, I think Batman would ultimately determine that where the fruit is coming from is Morio. Why and how? Well, we could easily say the person who had the Locacaca in Gotham probably told Batman, but I would assume through Batman's very, very good detective skills that he would probably narrow it down through world events and similar side effects that occur with people who take the Locacaca and try to narrow it down as much as possible. And wait, before somebody says, wouldn't Batman figure out the medical industry would profit a lot from this thing? So wouldn't he just go to the hospitals in Morio in order to, investigate there? You're smart. I like you. But no, that would make this video incredibly short. So we're not doing that one. So we'll move on. Batman arriving to Morio gets a clue pretty fast that this place is pretty bizarre. What clues him off is the walleyes of Morio. Some years before Batman actually showed up to Morio, an earthquake had occurred, revealing the walleyes. The locals don't go near the walleyes due to the weird properties it possesses. However, recently though, two men have been discovered underneath the ground near some of these walleyes. One of them being dead and named Yoshikage Kira. Now, knowing Batman's detective history, Batman of course would read the coroner's report and ultimately determine that this man has very odd things about his body, some of them being very similar to how the Locacaca and the exchange works. However though, instead of replacing one limb for another, Yoshikage Kira's body has replaced whole limbs that don't match with his body. I think in this moment, knowing how smart Batman is that I think he would ultimately determine that somebody has already figured out how to modify the Locacaca. So Batman does get a little bit worried here. However, he can't theorize for too long because just like in the original story, the muscle of the Locacaca organization here is here to tie up loose ends. And since Batman needs info here, he does not engage with the two that are there, those being Tamaki and Yotsuyu. So with these two being in Batman's sight, he of course goes after each of them individually to see if he can get any info out of them. So two things before I move on. Obviously, number one, Josuke and Yasuho won't be here. Come up with any reason for this. I want Batman to fight all these guys one-on-one and not have like any team interference here. So maybe like Bruce Wayne helps Josuke after, the whole waking up right next to the walleyes thing and tries to help the man who clearly has a loss of memory. And Yasuho, for whatever reason, just doesn't show up in this universe. And second, we will be going in chronological order of when the villains show up just for convenience sake. That being the case, Batman tracks Yotsuyu to the Higashikata estate. I still think regardless of the timeline, whether or not Josuke is there or not, Yotsuyu still would scope out the Higashikata estate for evidence of the new Locacaca being there. Why he does this is both Josefumi Kujo and Yoshikage Kira, the two halves that make up Josuke, were found near there. So it would probably be the most obvious spot to look for the Locacaca around there. So the Dark Knight and the first rock human we see in the franchise have their first encounter. How is this fight playing out? Now, if you were a fan of my last video, either being a Batman fan or a JoJo fan, you're probably asking me right now, does Batman gain his stand like last time? And of course, yes, you guys absolutely adored Good Grief, so I'm putting him back in the story once again. Now, for the new fans who don't know what I'm talking about and why Batman gains a stand here is, well, stands are the manifestation of one's fighting spirit. And since Batman has that in droves and the walleyes he was at previously unlock those latent abilities, Good Grief activates during his fight with Yotsuyu. So what is Good Grief's stand ability? Well, Good Grief is a wearable stand that looks like Batman's cowl. When looking at Batman, while Good Grief is active, Batman is perceived as a bat-like demon with an intimidating aura that petrifies his enemies due to intense fear. The only downside is strong-willed individuals can break free of the fear. And the stand is not really made for combat. It's just there to kind of amplify Batman's already intimidating aura and abilities. While it can parry, that's about as much as you're going to get from it because it's just a cowl. However, though, regardless of that, Batman has an advantage finding him first and basically beats him in every category possible, whether that be agility, combat, overall intelligence, etc., etc. I quite literally cannot fathom Yotsuyu being a threat at all. And even if he tries to hide away using his rock human abilities, he's still a creature that gives off energy, so Batman will probably be able to find him through heat seeking alone. Something that he is known for depending on the character you're looking at for the Batman. And while I am a rock's ability to pick a specific object to target you, progressively getting faster and hitting harder, thanks to Batman's mobility, thanks to his utility belt, and just overall athleticism, I highly doubt this ability would actually be highly effective on Batman. So with Batman having almost every advantage in the book here, Batman interrogates Yotsuyu and comes out with a few pieces of evidence here. The biggest one being is, well, there is an entirely new species of humanoid humanoid on the planet, that being the rock humans. And this group in specific are selling the Locacaca. Aside from that, I don't think Batman would get a lot of information out of Yotsuyu. Being a low-ranking member and just not knowing what information he actually holds within the original manga, this is where he stops being important. However, with Batman's no killing rule, could he return to the group and become possibly a threat for later? Answer, no. Thankfully, actually. You see, because rock humans operate under different social norms in their groups, they only work in groups together because of monetary value. So once that stops or is threatened, they just kind of leave. This is stated within the JoJolian manga in different related chapters. Plus, if he did return to the group battered and beaten and just ratted them out to Batman, the reality of the situation is Toru and Wonder Review, or maybe one of the other rock humans, might just kill him for the lack of him not being strong enough to defeat Batman. So more likely than not, with any future rock human as well, they just kind of fade into the background after Batman beats their ass. So with Yotsuyu out of the way, let's move on to Tamaki. Now, this one is going to be much more interesting as Vitamin C, Tamaki's stand, is much more deadly than I Am a Rock. Vitamin C has the ability to soften anything to an extreme level, so much so that a simple piece of paper can cut through the human body like butter. However, though, the ability is only activated once you touch a surface that Vitamin C has also touched. And knowing the conditions of this fight and Batman finding Tamaki before that can even happen, because Tamaki needs a little bit of prep for his stand to work, Tamaki will be at a disadvantage here. However, Vitamin C is a very close range stand type, which means Batman's options are kind of limited here as Batman is a close range fighter. However, though, that's only partially looking at Batman's kit. Remember, this is the Dark Knight we're talking about, and he has a whole host of tools within his utility belt. So batarangs and various versions of the batarang can be used here in order to even the playing field. However, though, I will give Tamaki his credit. If he catches Batman off guard, Tamaki actually has a pretty decent chance of actually just stopping this here and now, because if Tamaki stand rushes him with Vitamin C, Batman will instantly turn into a very soft but malleable liquid / rubber. It depends on your interpretation of what you become. Regardless, though, I think this fight's outcome depends on your interpretation of Batman. Do you think Batman just hops into the fight and then slowly learns how Tamaki and Vitamin C work, or Batman analyzes him before he jumps his ass and uses his fear-based background in order to pressure Tamaki, which, mind you, can work. We see that when Tamaki is pressured by individuals who are not affected by Vitamin C that much and know how to fight, he kind of ends up becoming a bitch. So only when he has the power advantage is when he is confident. So while I think this fight might be interesting to watch, it's not going to be very difficult for Batman, as there is a lot of options for Batman to win. So that being the case, what does Batman learn from Tamaki? I personally think a few things. First off, Batman confirms that the Locacaca organization is definitely within Morio and it is bigger than he thinks. Second, he probably ends up figuring out where some of the other rock humans are at, that being Aisho and the two Aphex brothers, potentially even Jobin Higashikata. And for anybody wondering how Batman figures that out, these guys have all their quite literally dead names on cell phones, so Batman just doing some cross-referencing, maybe finds photos on some of these things, he probably would be able to easily determine who is and who isn't a rock human. Yasuho within the original story was able to do this pretty easily, just doing some very basic research, and even found out about what the Locacaca was in real life with some very basic searches. So I highly doubt Batman wouldn't be able to figure that out either. Remember, one of the best detectives on the entire planet, by the way. So how do we move forward from here? Two of the strongest members of the physical Locacaca selling group have been defeated. The reason why I asked this is to correct a mistake from my last Batman video. Initially, I thought JoJo's affected Batman, but not vice versa, which led to one of my funniest comments of all time. I love the fact that somebody thought Polnareff would use a bat signal to call Batman. It still sticks with me to this day. It's so fucking funny every time I look at it. But with that being the case, and now ejecting that kind of thought into this scenario, what are the chances that some of the rock humans, after a few days of not getting in contact with some of these characters, and maybe rumors going about that Batman is within Morio, is it possible that some of the rock humans leave because that's, well, their nature? Somebody is now pressuring them, the power is slipping from this area. Is it worth it to actually stay in Morio while Batman is doing this investigation? Now thinking about it, I think for the remaining rock humans, it would be much easier easier for themselves to reintegrate themselves back into society somewhere else on the planet. And if for whatever reason they don't do that, Batman is going to beat all three of their asses. And it's bad. Like really, really, really bad. Ayaisho, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, I'm bad with Japanese, is a highly paranoid person. Batman being Batman and also having good grief as a stand makes him like 4 times weak to Batman. On top of that, his stand, Dubiwa, requires Batman to get touched by him, which that's a death sentence in and of itself. And even if he does touch him, trust me, Dubiwa's ability to make somebody hold their breath isn't going to do shit to Batman. Trust me, Batman can hold his breath and beat your ass, no problem. Nothing burger of a fight. And looking at the Aphex Twins, while the ability to switch one object from one hand to another is interesting, and the other brother having the ability to throw out toxic gas is interesting as well, the fact of the matter is Josuke, with his subpar fighting ability, but still good enough, was able to beat the shit out of both of them with some difficulty. Mind you, Batman is a martial arts master. Those two dumbasses are also getting their ashes handed to themselves. Whether or not either of these fights take place, Batman has enough information here to go off of to find the researched part of the Locacaca organization. And on the off chance they do happen, Batman has more info on rock humans and probably has some dirt on Job and Higashikata. So just like in Jojoin in the midway point, the plot kind of changes to focus on looking for the Locacaca and the rest of the rock humans. So that being similar to this case, what does Batman know at the current time? Batman in the moment has been dealing with the physical Locacaca seller group / cartel members who had some involvement in the death of Yoshikage Kira. And for whatever reason, some of his body parts were swapped out with somebody else's, being something very similar to the exchange that the Locacaca can do. And at the current point in time, Josuke is off screen doing something. So I would figure Batman tries to look into Yoshikage Kira's background to figure out who he was. And shocker, Yoshikage Kira was a doctor whose mother is currently in the hospital with a very powerful disease affecting her body. Batman, being the genius detective that he is, comes to the conclusion that more likely than not, Yoshikage Kira wanted to use the Locacaca to fix his mother's ailment. However, for some reason, was killed by the group in question. So Batman, or rather should I say Bruce Wayne, pays Holly Joestar Kira a visit. However, by this point in the story, Holly Joestar Kira is in critical condition and her medical bills are not being paid. So I think in a wholesome moment, Bruce Wayne, seeing the efforts of a child who couldn't save his mother, picks up the weight and pays for her medical bills. A very wholesome moment that I think Bruce would honestly do. It's so in character for him, and I honestly love it. However, on the flip side of that, Batman figures out a lot of information here. Holly is clearly being tested with the Locacaca fruit by the hospital. Whether or not he figures that out as Bruce Wayne or sneakily figures it out as Batman by searching her medical records. In that moment, as either Bruce Wayne or Batman, he figures that he's currently the most deep anybody has ever been, surpassing even Yoshikage Kira in this conspiracy. I would figure that maybe Batman would laugh or chuckle, the fact that, of course, the medical industry would totally love to abuse the ability of the Locacaca and what it can do. There is something strange happening at this very hospital. Now, to give the original Jojoin crew some credit, Batman is going to have to do some digging here, unlike the original team, which had a whole person come up to them and then kind of spoil where the group was. On top of that, a whole event happening at the Higashikata household, then doubling down on that original encounter. So it will take Batman some time here to figure out the rest of the rock humans that are working at the hospital here. And for the person saying, well, if he's investigating for rock humans, wouldn't that mean he would eventually meet Toru? That is a possibility, but for this example, we're going to say for whatever reason, Toru is really good at hiding and Batman doesn't find him. And if he does find him, we'll talk about that later. Moving on to these next 3 fights. Now, they can go in any order, it really doesn't matter here. However, after each consecutive fight, Batman slowly learns who the main boss truly is. So just like in release order, we'll start with Urban Gorilla. Now, yet again, I think this is going to lead to another Batman victory because of utility belt usage and regular Batman gear being an obstacle for Urban Gorilla and his stand Brainstorm. Brainstorm's ability, in contact with flesh, will slowly start to dissolve said flesh, and there is no way to remove it once it gets inside your body. However, if quick enough with some water, can get rid of the stand easily. However, the main problem here is that Batman really doesn't expose his skin all that often except his head area. So in a 1v1 encounter, Brainstorm is kind of useless, due to the fact that Batman would be able to easily figure that out and then just range him out until victory. Unless in an alternative scenario, Urban Gorilla is next to his versus rock animal, which is pronounced like this, and I'm not gonna say that for like the next 2 minutes. That's absolutely insane. The rock animal's ability is to dive underground and basically dig while Urban Gorilla sits inside of him, making Brainstorm much more effective to catch an enemy off guard. Now, while I think this would cause Batman a little trouble at first, if this is the encounter that actually properly happens, it won't be too big of a deal for very long though, as I believe because of Batman's fighting genius that he will eventually tech out Urban Gorilla over a period of time, similar to Josuke and Mamazuku within the original story, by going to higher elevations in order to confuse Urban Gorilla and his animal, as I see Batman using batarangs in order to confuse him on top of the surface of the earth. While much more interesting than the last few fights, I don't think this fight is going to be really that crazy for Batman, so much so that he's defeated. I think this fight is relatively easy for him to win because of his normal Batman equipment that he usually has, on top of the fact that he has a very effective stand here, plus his fighting genius. So at the end of this fight with Urban Gorilla, Batman's suspicions are confirmed, and there are rock humans operating at TG University Hospital. So the investigation continues. However though, the next fight might be actually pretty difficult. So difficult, in fact, it might even be more difficult than the Tamaki fight. Enter Ozone Baby and Poor Tom. Now, Ozone Baby's stand ability is a long-range stand with the ability to pressurize closed rooms to such a degree that the human body starts to fail, and once placed outside a pressurized room, depressurized sickness starts to occur, affecting the body from the inside out. This stand is so powerful, in some cases, it will just cause the body to implode, looking at Mamazuku Rai, for example. So, that being the simple explanation of how Ozone Baby works, how does this fight play out? Well, I think it depends on a few factors, honestly. Two in favor for Poor Tom. Number one, if Batman is 300 feet away from Ozone Baby, with no ability to get across to him very fast in order to defeat him, depressurization in an open area will kill him. Number two, being 300 feet out in a pressurized area indoors without being able to tech it out, being opening pressurized areas and then depressurizing them by opening and closing them, would more than likely kill Batman. Now, in both of these scenarios, Ozone Baby and Poor Tom clearly have the advantage. However, throughout Batman's entire career, and what we've seen in this video, Batman is usually one hunting these guys down, always being in close proximity. So the absolute worst case scenarios in favor for Poor Tom, more likely than not, won't happen. However, though, that doesn't mean Batman is off the hook yet, because being closer to Poor Tom means more pressure, meaning that Batman in a split-second decision would have to do something pretty drastic. Similar to how Josuke defeated Poor Tom, he would have to throw something at Poor Tom to either deactivate the ability or render him unconscious. Now, Batman does have a few options here, either being concussive grenades, smoke grenades, batarangs, something that he can throw, or alternatively, when Poor Tom is pressured, he does get scared very easily. So he could use Good Grief just to deactivate the ability through sheer fear alone. However, Batman, because of the pressure, would ultimately take some heavy damage in the process. So basically, Batman would have to aura farm on Ozone Baby and Poor Tom in order to win, which is really funny in my mind. Like, I imagine him just standing over Poor Tom and Poor Tom's like, oh my god, stop it, please, god no. That's just how I imagine it. Now, jokes aside, I think Batman can do this. However, to give Poor Tom his credit, just like Tamaki, he can be killed by this stand. However, I think it's not a guaranteed kill because Batman does have options here, so we can move forward. And our next rock human, of course, is Wu Tomaki with his stand, Dr. Wu. You don't know how many times when I originally read JoJolion, I got those two confused. Regardless, Dr. Wu's ability is very, very simple. It has the ability to basically disintegrate Wu Tomaki into very small rock fragments that float in the wind. However, in contact with a human body, can either possess the human body or give the human body a severe allergic reaction once within the human body. Now, originally, I thought this fight would end up becoming a classic JoJo is running away from the villain type of fight until the JoJo figures out how to creatively execute a finishing move in order to stop the pursuing stand, which happens twice in JoJo, actually, and both of them involving Josuke and kind of Johnny one time. And then technically Joseph too, fighting Wamu, but that wasn't a stand, that was a pillarman. Regardless, regardless, there's a few of them. However, though, I came to the realization if this Batman is experienced at least 10 years of fighting his rogues gallery, I would assume he's already fought in Mr. Freeze. And since mainline comic Batman has this contingency about him where he keeps a lot of his stuff in his utility belt in order to defeat certain villains or heroes at all times, I would think that Batman would actually have cryo grenades on him regularly in limited supply in his utility belt. So honestly here, this might be a solo utility belt victory for Batman, just being because he's fought enemies very similar to this in the past. However, if you don't like that answer, I think Batman would slowly figure out that Wu was trying to enter his body and he's clearly trying to ride on the wind, quite literally. So Batman would have to get into an environment where air is not a factor, or at least a heavy factor, in order to subdue Wu Tamaki. To be fair, the way he was originally defeated was kind of bullshit and very like scenario based. The team really did get lucky fighting him. So I will give Batman some credit there. He'll probably have to discover something. So Wu has at least a slightly better chance of defeating Batman than he did the original crew, because this fight is not taking place at the hospital, so he can't be destroyed or subdued by medical cement. So Batman now has defeated most, if not nearly all, of the research team. On top of that, he's also destroyed most of the actual movement team as well. However, Batman knows for a fact that if the head of the monster is not subdued, it will come back. So after gathering enough evidence, Batman figures the only person left within the hospital that could be a rock human, shockingly enough, is the very top man at the head of the board, the head doctor. Batman comes to this conclusion after fighting the 3 previous villains who all had medical degrees or medical knowledge in order to keep their occupation up and their disguise up at the hospital. So Batman figures it has to be the same with the head doctor. So the Batman pursues him, ultimately activating the ability, and the first encounter with Wonder Review immediately starts, wherever that may be. Now, for the Batman fan that doesn't know how Wonder Review operates, the ability goes as the following. Any form of pursuit, whether that be physical or just thinking about it within your mind, will activate the ability. Any pursuit of the head doctor, Toru, or Wonder Review itself will activate the ability. In the pursuit of these 3, Calamity will knock into you at varying levels. At first, heavily crippling you, and at the very highest echelon, that being perceiving Wonder Review in very close proximity, or Toru himself, will cause instantaneous death of some calamity very soon to you. Said objects can be anything: furniture, rain, random shit falling out of the sky, and a whole other plethora of things, even your own attacks, and may or may not influence other people around you for Calamity to even get worse. Hirohiko Araki, the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, has stated in a volume statement that Wonder Review and its ability to be Calamity and manipulate Calamity is one of the strongest JoJo villain abilities, if not the strongest JoJo stand ability in general for the entire franchise, beating out stands that can stop time, skip time, loop time, fast forward time to the end of the universe itself with infinite speed, and stands that have the ability to manipulate good fortune in general, on top of so many other different villain stands. Toru and Wonder Review are the strongest. So, does JoJo's Batman have any option to defeat this character? I'm gonna cut it to it briefly to you. Fuck no. In the original story, by the second time Josuke and Mamazuku Rai try to pursue Wonder Review, rain becomes hyper deadly and makes both characters get closer to death than any previous stand encounter in the series. If it wasn't because of an inconvenience time with the police saving them last second, Josuke and Mamazuku would have died to Wonder Review, just like that. Just some simple rain that would have carved bullet holes in between them both would have killed them. No grand battle of philosophies of calamity versus miracles, rock humans versus humans, just a simple off-screen death for Toru against his enemies. Now, I will play devil's advocate here and say I think Batman is smart enough to survive the first few calamities once pursuing Wonder Review and Toru. Hell, he might even figure it out. But the problem is he has no options to defeat him. In the best case scenario, he draws out with Wonder Review, and that's not his original plan. You see, I think Josuke and Batman would come to the same conclusion to make Toru and Wonder Review pursue him. However, once in close proximity with Toru and Wonder Review, what does Batman do? Because he can't get close to him because that would activate Calamity, killing him in the process. Even if he tries to seal him away somehow, Wonder Review has the ability to go through any material object, as Wonder View almost acts like a ghost, meaning that Toru would somehow eventually break out of this sealment of some kind, meaning that the only way to effectively defeat Toru is to get him close to you, then make an elaborate plan to get him into an area of effect to kill him. Yes, this is Batman's only option, but it's like one of those weird traps where like it wasn't intended for you and I kill you. But in that process, even if you kill Toru, Wonder View still permeates after his death, becoming a roamless stand, basically effectively a curse of the nearby area, affecting everybody and everything, meaning that Batman will die because he killed Toru. In the original story, the only way to defeat Wonder View is through something illogical, as Wonder View is a logic-based stand that manipulates the logic of the universe and its rules. And sadly, in Batman's base kit, he has nothing of this level in order to defeat Toru and Wonder View and come out alive. Meaning that in Batman's best case scenario of just defeating Toru, at bare minimum, Wonder View would be a roaming curse of a stand, a plague to Morio, with possibly Jobin, because he's still alive in this scenario, finding the Locacaca on the Higashikata estate and becoming a fruit and medical billionaire, killing his father for the head of the family. Unlike the original story where he survives. The middleman always wins. Now, like I said previously, Toru could have shown up in between the last 3 stand fights, meaning that Toru and the Locacaca organization could have survived, ultimately winning in this scenario. So to answer the question, could a JoJo's Batman take down Toru and the Locacaca organization, is a probable no. However, there is a bit of hope. Could a mainline comic Batman actually defeat Toru, Wonder View, and the Locacaca organization? Now, to do some very quick power scaling, a mainline comic Batman is vastly stronger than a JoJo's Batman, even without a stand. In terms of combat prowess, he is basically the 3rd or 4th strongest person on the planet in terms of martial arts. The only characters beating him are literally Wonder Woman, a demigod, Lady Shiva, and Deathstroke. Mind you, those 2 above him are superhuman. In terms of intelligence, Batman is on par with Lex Luthor. Mind you, Lex Luthor has shown feats of being comparable to Brainiac with a 12th dimensional level intellect. That's pretty damn big. And in terms of overall physical stats, he is more or less peak human, with some cases of speeds of Batman reacting to being FTL at bare minimum. So Batman is pretty powerful in terms of DC Comics. On top of all of that, Batman has nearly 100 years worth of scaling because all mainline Batmans have been fused into one, the one that we're currently talking about right now. And thanks to 100 years worth of scaling, that means Batman has encountered supernatural things in the past before, so he would be able to sense stands as well. So current Batman is incredibly powerful. Throw that Batman into one of his Justice League Buster suits and he immediately becomes stronger than Wonder View. But that's in terms of stats. But again, we come to the dilemma of fighting roaming Wonder View and how to take it out. Remember, this version of Batman could defeat Wonder View, but the problem is you have to permanently defeat Wonder View through something illogical. Now, DC scaling is really busted. I'm just gonna make that plainly obvious off the bat. So if Batman here is given a little bit of prep time away from Wonder View and has the ability to call on allies, somebody like Hal Jordan, for example, they could, in theory, will into existence something illogical to defeat roaming Wonder View. Now, that's just one. We could possibly bring in Constantine, Santana, possibly Superman and his whole host of weird objects he has in the Fortress of Solitude, maybe Wonder Woman and the Greek gods help, etc., etc. However, I know a lot of power scaling fans don't like to do that, as people really do want proper 1v1s with no prep time or outside help. I totally understand that. However, you can make an argument saying that, well, if Josuke originally in the story had like a week to prepare and think to actually properly encounter Wonder View, I think you could give Batman the same grace. So here are my final thoughts. Could Batman take down Toru and the Locacaca organization? In terms of 1v1s, whether that be a JoJo Batman or a regular mainline comic Batman, no. Thanks to the weird caveat of having to defeat Wonder View through illogical means that Batman in base without any help will probably lose more times than not. However, if you give Batman the same amount of prep like Josuke did with a mainline comic Batman with all of this scaling, I do think Batman could do it with help from very specific characters within the DC universe. You gotta love that DC cosmology scaling being out-reversal sometimes. Oh boy, that was a lot to cover. And sorry if I missed anything. It genuinely was a lot of work to make this video. I have had to record this over multiple days. So if you actually did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. It helps out a hell of a lot. And if you guys do want to see like a proper mainline comic Batman versus Wonder Review video strictly with some conditions involved, please comment. I would love to do that video. It actually genuinely does intrigue me a hell of a lot. It would really test the limits of Batman's intelligence and prep time with a stand whose whole thing is in order to stop prep time and the art of pursuing it. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, consider supporting the Patreon if you really do like the content I'm making here on YouTube. It helps a hell of a lot. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.